Stories about real world. These people have no idea how the real world works. Story 1. The story of Daddy's awesomeness. A friend of mine saw a guy get arrested in college. The guy was fighting back and cursing at the cops like crazy. "Do you know who my dad is?" The cop asked for fun. "He owns the #1 used car dealership in upstate New York." We were in Massachusetts. They weren't impressed with his inheritance, so they arrested him. The story of how Todd, heir to the greatest used car dealership in the northeastern United States, faced a harsh reality couldn't just be forgotten. It seemed that college, where everything could be settled by connections or money, turned out to be a place where even gold medals for success in used car sales offered no advantage. So, imagine an evening of college students walking around campus, getting ready for another party, or quietly celebrating Friday in their rooms. Jack and his friends were just walking down the hallway, discussing how great it would be if their campus finally got a proper coffee machine. Then, quite suddenly, they noticed police cars parked outside one of the dorms. A crowd of students surrounded Todd, who stood there with a look of indignation on his face, as if he had just been accused of selling dubious used toasters instead of cars. The cops, while trying to maintain seriousness, were clearly having a hard time keeping from laughing. Todd was so outraged that he didn't even notice when they started searching him. "Do you know who my father is?" he asked indignantly, as if that should instantly clear him of all charges and perhaps even award him a medal for exceptional service to his father's business. The policeman, one of those who clearly hadn't listened to the sermons on the importance of respecting car dealers, decided to play a game. "So who's your father?" he asked with feigned interest, but his look read only one thing. "Boy, I've seen it all today. He owns the #1 used car dealership in all of upstate New York," Todd proudly blurted out. And then the absurdity of the situation finally became obvious, even to the boy himself. The policeman nodded slowly, as if realizing the enormity of the matter. "Oh, come on. Wow. But you know, we're here in Massachusetts, and it seems to me that your dad probably has no jurisdiction in these parts," the cop replied sarcastically, screwing the handcuffs on Todd's wrists. Jack and his friends watching this farce couldn't believe the whole scene was taking place before their eyes. Todd looked like someone who had suddenly realized that his legacy wasn't really all that impressive outside of a small town upstate. The irony of the situation was that Todd, who had always been proud of his legacy, was facing for the first time a world where his family business was about as useless as winter tires in Miami. He was to spend a couple days in a department where no one knew about his father and where no one was interested in the best deals on used cars. When he returned to campus, he went quieter than water, lower than grass. His legendary stories about the wonderful sales at the dealership were replaced by much more modest tales about the importance of watching his words and not confusing Massachusetts with New York. And for Jack and his friends, the story became an endless source of jokes that they enjoyed repeating, each time adding more and more details. And so, one day, Jack wondered, if Todd ever decided to return to the family business, would his first move be to create a new advertising slogan? Something along the lines of, "Our cars are as borderless as our reputation." But that idea seemed too utopian even for Todd. Story 2. The guy who sold his rented TV set. A guy sold his rented TV and couldn't understand why the rental center was threatening him with a theft charge. A guy named Alex, a typical student, had always been a bit naive about finances. He was sure that renting a TV was a great way to get something cool for minimal money. But one day, when the money ran out and the TV continued to stand in a place of honor in his room, he had an idea. "Why should I pay rent when I can just sell this TV and save myself the headache?" he thought. Alex's logic was simple and brilliant at the same time. If he had the thing, it was his. So, without further thought, he loaded the TV into his friend's car and drove it to the nearest market, where he found someone willing to buy it for cash. Several weeks passed, and Alex didn't even think about his deal of the century until he got a call from the rental center. The voice on the other end was stern and disgruntled. "Alex, we noticed that you were late paying for the TV rental." Alex froze for a moment, but then remembered that his problem was solved. "Oh, don't worry. I sold it, so it's no longer in my possession." The silence in the receiver lasted a few seconds, after which a voice, now with obvious irritation, answered, "You sold a rented television set? That's called stealing, Alex. You can't sell something that doesn't belong to you." Alex, thinking at first that it was a mistake or a prank, soon realized that the situation was much more serious than he had thought. He was threatened with legal action, and now Alex was completely confused. How could it be so? He was sure that since he had the TV set, the money for it was also his. However, after several calls and threats, he finally realized that renting did not mean ownership. Now he was faced with the problem of how to get out of this unpleasant situation. He tried to call the buyer and offer to return the money, but of course, he had long ago enjoyed a brand new TV and was not going to return the purchase. In the end, Alex was forced to return the rental center an amount much higher than the one he received for the TV. This incident became a lifelong lesson for him that renting and owning are not the same thing. Story 3. Taxes don't exist, and it's just fiction? Recently, I started a new job, and I had a college graduate in my orientation class. She was confused about her income tax and shocked that she had to pay into Social Security. Something like, "I thought the government paid for that." She didn't even know what job she was hired for because her father handled all the paperwork. When he started his new position, it was immediately clear that this day would not be boring. His task this time was simple: to conduct a career guidance session for a group of young professionals who had recently graduated from college. It seemed like nothing special, but one girl stood out among them, and he noticed her right away. She looked about 23, and her eyes were a mixture of confusion and worry, like someone who had realized for the first time that the world wasn't so simple. She sat as concentrated as if she were trying to unravel the mysteries of the universe. When the subject of income tax came up, she suddenly raised her hand and asked, almost in a whisper so no one would hear, "What kind of tax is that?" There was an awkward silence in the classroom. He wanted to explain, but then the girl continued, "I thought it was paid for by the government." "Well, they pay for everything, don't they?" At this, the teacher's eye twitched. But that was just the beginning. When the conversation turned to Social Security contributions, the girl looked like she had just been notified of the coming apocalypse. Why is that even necessary? Who came up with that? She was genuinely indignant. Her outrage was so naive that the other students just didn't know how to react. The further the lesson went, the more the truth was revealed. The girl didn't know what kind of job she had gotten because her father had filled out all the paperwork for her. In fact, he made the decision about her career too. It turned out that this was the first time the girl had ever heard that money is not an infinite resource and that everything in this world must be paid for. Gradually, the teacher began to realize that this was not just a career guidance class, but something like a journey on an unknown planet where the laws of logic do not apply. The girl was a symbol of how far some young people are from the real world when everything is served to them on a platter. At the end of the class, she walked up to him and asked, "So I have to work now? What happens if I just, well, don't?" The teacher realized that it was simply impossible to explain to her what life was all about in one lesson. He advised her to ask her father. After all, he seemed to know the answers to all her questions. As the girl left the classroom, he couldn't help but smile. He wondered how far her naivety would help her to go in life. After all, somewhere in this world there would definitely be people who would help her realize that not everything was as simple as it seemed in her sheltered world. In the meantime, he realized one thing. He would have many more of these sessions to come, and each one would be no less absurd and amusing. Story 4. Desire to become a game designer. My brother wanted to become a game designer. I asked how things were going and what he was doing. My mom went to the nearest supermarket to get art supplies so he could do design. He didn't know what coding was in terms of game design, and he didn't know graphic design. He thought he could just draw some swords, pistols, and shields. Someone would pay him to do it, and he would make a living at it. With zero experience. He's almost 30, by the way. In a far corner of an ordinary house, in the most ordinary room with a computer desk where every detail seemed to scream adult dreams, sat the main character's brother. He was almost 30. But his enthusiasm was at the level of a teenager who had just discovered the world of video games. Even as a child, he was convinced that all great creations begin with one simple thing, a dream. And here was his dream, to become a game designer. But unfortunately, his understanding of game design stopped somewhere around the elementary school level when he got into drawing swords, guns, and other cool items that he thought should be the centerpiece of any game. When the protagonist asked how things were going, his brother was absolutely thrilled with his idea and told him that he had ordered all the necessary tools. True, he had to ask his mom to go to the store for art supplies to do this because he had no idea what was needed. Mom bought watercolor paints, pencils, and some drawing paper, anything she thought would help the creative process. My brother excitedly laid it all out on the table and set to work. The first thing he drew looked more like a child's doodle than something that could be part of a video game. When asked how he was going to integrate his drawings into the game mechanics, his brother hesitated and said that it was up to the programmers. "I'm a designer," he said, with the confidence of a man who has always been convinced that the idea is the most important thing, and the realization will come somehow. But when he was asked how he was going to promote his masterpieces and earn money from them, his brother just shrugged and said that it was not his problem either. He believed that talent and unique ideas would sell themselves. He seemed to be sure that somewhere out there in the world, there was an army of people willing to pay for his swords and pistols, even if they were neither sophisticated nor original. Soon, this confidence began to experience the first blows of reality. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact potential clients and offer his drawings, his brother began to realize that no one was willing to shell out money for swords and guns drawn on a piece of paper. "It's just temporary difficulties," he reassured himself as he sent his masterpieces everywhere he could. Time passed, and with each passing day, the brother realized that he might have to reconsider his plans. Gradually, the watercolor paints and pencils began to get dusty, and the thoughts of becoming a real designer were slowly but surely replaced by looking for a job at the neighborhood supermarket. Story 5. Rock Festival and Straightener. Went to a metal music festival with a friend and camped out there. We had just woken up, and she pulled out a hair straightener and asked where the outlets were. When I told her there were no outlets at the campground, she looked at me in horror and said, "So I won't be able to straighten my hair." On one of those summer nights when the sun is barely beginning to slip toward the horizon and the shadows from the trees are starting to get longer, two friends arrived at a metal music festival. They brought along a tent full of supplies and an unbreakable desire to immerse themselves in the hard rock atmosphere. The evening was full of anticipation. The music was loud, the people were fun, and for their small group, including both a rock lover and an integral friend, it was a real adventure. There, among the marquees and tents, where there was an inexpressible atmosphere of freedom and bubbling enthusiasm, they unfolded their tent, settled in and immersed themselves in the festival atmosphere. The night passed under the sounds of guitars, drums, and choral singing of metal fans, and soon, as planned, they fell asleep. The next morning, when the sun was just beginning to break through the thin walls of the tent, her friend woke up and decided to use the time to clean herself up. She had a hair straightener in her bag, and with her fine sense of style, she wanted to look flawless even in festival conditions. Getting up, she leisurely began looking for outlets to plug in her equipment. When, tired of searching, she asked her friend where she could find outlets, the latter, somewhat perplexed, replied, "Well, there are no outlets here. This is a campground with no electricity." To this, her friend reacted as if she had heard her most basic tenets of life being challenged. Her face contorted with horror, and her eyes widened in fear. Soon her shock was replaced by utter confusion, and she uttered, "So I won't be able to straighten my hair." Gradually, a slight trace of tragedy appeared in her expression. As if this little detail was the end of the world, her friend continued to stand there as if mesmerized, and her straightener looked like the last bastion of civilization that she had never been able to find an outlet for. To dispel the confusion, the friend began to look for other options. She suggested using solar panels, but this idea too was rejected with a firm, "That's not it." As a result, they set out to explore the surrounding area in search of a civilization that could offer some solution to her problem. And so, as they set off, they came across an impromptu goods and services fair. They sold everything from sequined headbands to beach dresses and, oddly enough, electric generators. My friend, excited as a child, immediately decided to buy the generator without bothering to check its functions. Returning to her tent with her new acquisition, she, as she had dreamed, plugged in the rectifier and began her favorite ritual. And then it turned out that the generator was not as powerful as she had expected. The generator wasn't as powerful as she'd expected it to be, so it just couldn't take the strain and started making strange noises, and the straightener simply wouldn't turn on. Instead of proudly showing off her smooth hair, her friend ended up with even wilder hair than usual. Story 6. Map for hire. My friend stole my bank card info and bought herself a bunch of expensive things. Before I filed a report, I asked if she did it, because I knew, 1, she was going through a difficult time and I wanted to give her the opportunity to do the right thing. 2, I might be suspected of fraudulently conspiring with my friend, since it might be think that I had ordered all these things to my friend's house so that I could report them stolen and get a refund. She said it wasn't her. I believed her and filed a police report. When she was arrested, she said she didn't realize that information theft cases go this far, that far. She thought you just call the bank and they give you your money back without any kind of investigation. Emily has always considered her friend Sarah to be good and reliable. When Sarah found herself in a difficult financial situation, Emily, with the utmost generosity, offered to help her. She could have been the one to lend a helping hand in a time of need. But this act of kindness quickly turned into a real nightmare. One day, Emily discovered that large sums of money were missing from her bank card. Her account was filled with purchases she hadn't made: expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and even a brand new smartphone. She immediately suspected that someone close to her might be involved in the story, and soon remembered Sarah. Her friendship with Sarah was unstable, and her financial difficulties could clearly have prompted her to act in this way. Before contacting the police, Emily decided to talk to Sarah. After meeting with her, she asked her directly if Sarah was involved in the data theft. She wanted to give Sarah a chance to make amends if she was, but Sarah, with an expression of utter bewilderment, assured Emily that she had nothing to do with it. She seemed sincere, and Emily, having no other evidence, decided to believe her. And despite her inner doubts, Emily filed a police report. Sarah was soon arrested. She denied her guilt, but the police discovered that the purchases had been sent to her address and had been paid for using Emily's data. And that's where the fun began. Sarah, while at the station, stated that she did not realize how seriously her actions would be considered. She thought that if she just called the bank and said that the data had been stolen, the bank would just return the money without any repercussions. "I didn't think information theft cases could go this far," she said, with a look as if Emily was accusing her of stealing bread from the store rather than committing a serious financial crime. The investigation found that Sarah had planned to use the stolen data to buy more things, but was stopped before she could make even more transactions. The prosecutor was relentless, and Sarah eventually pleaded guilty. In court, she was punished to the fullest extent of the law. Emily, watching her old friend behind bars, was filled with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, she was glad that justice had been served, but on the other hand, her good heart was badly wounded. She lost not only her money, but also her trust in people.